April 14th, 1945. Somewhere near Plauen, Saxony. The last light of the day slid over the black steel of the locomotive, its edges rimmed with dust and ash. America, Hitler's personal train, was crawling eastward under a sky heavy with smoke. The rails shimmered like veins through a dying country. Each wheel rotation sent a hollow echo through the empty countryside, a rhythm that once symbolized power, now only desperation. The conductor, Wilhelm Kruger, leaned out from the cabin window, his face streaked with soot. He'd been part of the Führersonderzug's crew since 1942, back when the train had moved with ceremony and confidence across conquered Europe. Back then, guards in crisp black uniforms stood at every door, and station masters saluted as the locomotive thundered past. Now only ghosts seemed to salute it. Behind the locomotive stretched a convoy of cars, a command coach with encrypted teleprinters, sleeping quarters fitted with silk curtains, a dining car polished to dull silver, and the Begleitwagen, the escort car, where the last of the SS guards sat smoking in silence. The insignias on their collars had lost their meaning. Kruger's assistant, a thin man named Otto Weiss, broke the silence. "Another town ahead," he said, voice low. "Or what's left of it." The headlight beam swept across the ruins of a village that had once been painted on postcards. The church steeple was a broken finger pointing at the heavens. Smoke still drifted from the rubble, faintly sweet from burned paper and charred wood. On the platform stood a small group of refugees, mostly women, a few old men, one holding a baby wrapped in a torn red flag. The train didn't stop. It wasn't supposed to. The Führer's train, even now, was to remain unseen. The SS officers had orders to keep it moving at irregular intervals to avoid Allied air reconnaissance. They'd already switched locomotives twice that week to throw off enemy tracking, but no one believed the Allies still cared where America was. In the dining car, once reserved for high-ranking officials, the crystal lamps flickered weakly as diesel generators coughed. The polished oak tables were covered with maps, cigarette ash, and a single half-eaten loaf of bread. The cook, who used to prepare lavish meals for Hitler's entourage, now rationed potatoes and canned meat. Outside, a distant rumble rolled through the air, not thunder but artillery. It came from the west, like a slow, steady heartbeat. "Americans," Weiss murmured. Kruger didn't answer. He adjusted the throttle, eyes fixed on the rails. The night wind carried faint voices, refugees walking the same direction as the train, dragging carts and bundles. Every station they passed was jammed with people desperate to escape the Red Army advancing from the east. The irony wasn't lost on him. Germany, once the conqueror, now fled from its own fire. At midnight, they halted near Hof, hidden under a grove of trees. The train's crew stepped onto the ground, listening to the silence between the distant guns. One of the SS guards, Untersturmführer Becker, stood smoking near the command car, muttering to another officer. "They say the Führer's in Berlin now," Becker said, flicking ash. "Gone to die in his capital, they say, but still orders us to move his damn train around the countryside." No one replied. Even among the SS, such talk carried risk. Kruger walked a few paces down the track, looking back at the train's silhouette, a black serpent coiled in the darkness. Once it had been a symbol of the Third Reich's reach, armored, luxurious, and precise. Now it hid like a fugitive. The engineer thought of the times he'd seen generals boarding with medals gleaming, of Hitler himself stepping onto the platform at Rostenburg with that rigid gait, surrounded by guards who seemed to believe the ground itself moved to obey him. He thought of the orders barked, the victories celebrated in toasts, and he thought of Stalingrad. That was when the silence began, not on the front, but inside the men. Weiss joined him, shivering in the chill. "Do you think he'll use it again?" Kruger looked at the train. "No, he's not coming back to this one." A sudden gust lifted the smell of burning fields. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then stopped. The engineer watched the smoke drift eastward toward Berlin. He didn't know it then, but America would never carry the Führer again. April 16th, 1945. The morning mist clung low over the Saxon hills. Dew gathered on the steel couplings of America, beating like sweat on a dying giant. Kruger stood beside the locomotive, watching SS officers gather near the command car. Their black uniforms looked faded, their boots scuffed, their movements uncertain. A courier had arrived during the night, a young man in a mud-caked uniform, trembling from exhaustion. His dispatch case bore the red wax seal of the Führerhauptquartier, though everyone knew the headquarters was now little more than a myth. He handed the envelope to Untersturmführer Becker, who broke the seal with a penknife. Kruger couldn't hear all the words, only fragments that floated through the cool air. Keep train operational, avoid capture, await further directives from Berlin. Berlin, everyone knew what that meant now. It meant fire and street fighting, Russian tanks in the suburbs. It meant Hitler still issuing orders to ghosts. Becker barked a few short instructions to the crew. We move south immediately. Avoid main lines. Allied aircraft are everywhere. Keep lights covered at all times. As the men climbed back aboard, Weiss muttered under his breath, "South? To where? There's nothing left down there." Kruger didn't answer. He just pulled the throttle forward, the engine coughing before it found its rhythm. The great train began to roll again, heading into the gray dawn. By mid-morning, they passed through Regensburg, or what remained of it. Smoke curled from every block. A shattered locomotive lay on its side near the freight yard, its wheels still ticking faintly as if it wanted to keep moving. Civilians scavenged among the ruins, carrying buckets of water from craters where pipes had burst. The Americans had bombed the city 2 days earlier. Now, as America crept through the wreckage, Kruger saw the look in the people's eyes. They didn't flinch at the sight of the SS insignia anymore. They didn't salute. They just stared. At a crossing, a woman with a bandaged child stood watching as the train passed. Her expression was blank, but her lips moved, not in greeting, but in silent words the engineer couldn't hear. Perhaps a curse, perhaps a prayer. Inside the dining car, Becker sat with a field map spread before him. "We'll reach the Austrian border by nightfall," he said to his aide. "From there, perhaps we can join the others regrouping near Berchtesgaden." "Regrouping?" The aide gave a dry laugh. "You mean running?" Becker's hand went to his Luger, then hesitated. He said nothing. Kruger, eavesdropping from the corridor, felt a chill crawl down his spine. The officers no longer spoke like men of command. They sounded like fugitives. As they rolled into the Bavarian countryside, the tracks began to fill with humanity. Endless lines of refugees, Wehrmacht deserters, and civilians pushing carts loaded with blankets, suitcases, and memories. The engineers slowed to avoid hitting them. Some waved white sheets, terrified that the train might be carrying troops. From above came the whine of engines. Not trains, but aircraft. The men ducked instinctively. A formation of P-51 Mustangs passed overhead, silver wings flashing in the sun. The sound alone made the SS guards flinch. "Lights out! Get under cover!" Becker shouted. The crew cut the engines, plunging America into silence. They waited as the planes roared by, the vibration rattling the cutlery in the dining car. No bombs fell. The train had blended into the landscape, a shadow among shadows. When it was over, Kruger exhaled and leaned back in his seat. Weiss looked pale. "They weren't even aiming for us," he said. "They don't care anymore. We're not a target. We're nothing." That struck Kruger harder than any explosion could. Later that night, they stopped near a small station called Straubing, half destroyed, its clock frozen at 14:22. The crew gathered outside by a signal post that no longer worked. Someone passed around a bottle of schnapps found in the baggage car. They drank quietly, staring at the stars obscured by smoke. "I used to think this train would outlast us all," Weiss said, "that it would carry history itself." "It has," Kruger replied, his voice low. "Just not the part we expected." A distant explosion rolled across the hills, faint but unmistakable. The Americans were closing in from the west, the Soviets from the east. The Reich was being crushed like metal between hammers. Becker came out of the command car, his face grim. "We've received word," he said to the assembled crew. "Berlin is under siege. The Führer has ordered us to hold position until further notice. Hold position? Weiss asked, incredulous. Out here in the open? Becker's jaw tightened. Those are the orders. Kruger looked down the dark track that stretched into nothing. He realized that even now, even with the Capitol burning, the men giving orders still believed movement could be controlled, that chaos could be mapped. But the rails led nowhere. April 20th, 1945, Adolf Hitler's 56th birthday. The date had once been marked with parades, speeches, and the thunder of marching boots through Berlin. Now, aboard America, the day passed in silence. The train lay hidden near a wooded ravine outside Passau, its carriages camouflaged under branches and burlap. The SS guards had stretched wire nets over the roofs to scatter the glint of metal. There was no ceremony, no telegrams, no celebratory broadcast from the Führer's headquarters. Only the faint hum of the generator and the distant pop of gunfire from across the river. Kruger sat in the engineer's cab, staring at the dead gauges. He hadn't heard from Berlin in 3 days. Radio reception was almost static. Fragments of panic, snippets of orders no one could follow. The world that America had once served was disintegrating. At noon, Becker came forward carrying a message sheet, creased and smudged from repeated handling. He placed it on the control panel. "From the Chancellery," he said quietly. "Or what's left of it." The message read simply, "Remain in concealment. Await contact from Führer's adjutants. Protect the train and its staff at all costs." Kruger looked at him. "Protect it from whom? There's nothing left to protect." Becker didn't respond. His uniform jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, his eyes hollow. The authority had gone out of him like breath from a punctured lung. By evening, the crew had grown restless. They gathered outside the dining car, smoking and whispering. The cook, once proud of preparing venison and trout for Hitler's entourage, now boiled cabbage and tinned meat. He handed bowls to the men without meeting their eyes. Someone asked if the Führer was still alive. Someone else said he'd shot himself. Another claimed he was flying to the Alps to lead a final stand. The rumors had no anchor. They drifted like smoke through the dark. Weiss sat beside Kruger on the embankment, watching fireflies spark over the grass. "Do you remember the first time we moved this train?" he said. "Back in 41? It gleamed like a mirror. Every town we passed cheered. Children waved flags. The officers would step out just to hear it." Kruger nodded. "I remember." Weiss took a slow breath. "I used to believe we were part of something that would last 1,000 years. Now I can't even believe we'll last the night." Kruger didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Around midnight, the crew heard distant artillery again, a rolling thunder from the west. The Americans were less than 50 kilometers away. The SS guards debated whether to move the train farther south toward Berchtesgaden, but the fuel was almost gone. Every bridge north of the Danube had been bombed. America was trapped. The next morning, April 21st, Kruger walked along the length of the train, studying its once grand features. The command car's walls were lined with maps, now curled and yellowed. The conference room, once filled with the sharp voices of generals, was coated in dust. A portrait of Hitler hung crooked above the radio desk. He noticed someone had draped a towel over it. He stopped by the communications compartment, where the teleprinter sat silent. Its keys were stained with coffee rings and sweat. The last printed line read, "Situation critical. Units surrounded near Potsdam. No further contact." The engineer ran his hand along the brass fittings, remembering the days when messages arrived every hour, when the entire war seemed to hum through this machine. Victory reports, troop movements, decrees from the Führer himself. Now it was just a relic. Outside, Weiss was loading a small cart with food supplies. "In case we have to run," he said. "Where would we go?" Kruger asked. Weiss gave a weary smile. "Anywhere that's not here." That afternoon, a convoy of Wehrmacht trucks rumbled past on the nearby road, what remained of the 11th Panzer Division retreating from Nuremberg. Dust rose around them like smoke from ghosts. A young lieutenant stopped briefly, saluting Becker. "Americans are 10 kilometers behind us," the officer shouted. If you want to live, get moving. They'll shoot anything with an iron cross on it. Becker hesitated, glancing back at the train. We have orders to remain. The officer spat into the dirt. Orders? He climbed into his truck, shaking his head. There are no orders anymore. As the convoy disappeared, silence returned. Kruger realized with a deep, sinking certainty that they were now alone, a forgotten fragment of the Reich, stranded in the woods, guarding a symbol no one cared about. That night, he dreamed of rails that led nowhere, of signals frozen on red. When he awoke, the air was thick with the smell of burning oil. In the distance, the horizon flickered orange. The war was coming for them now, and it didn't care who they were. April 24th, 1945. Dawn came gray and without birdsong. A cold mist drifted over the ravine where America lay hidden, the camouflaged netting now sagging with dew. The diesel generator had sputtered out during the night. No one bothered to restart it. For the first time in years, Hitler's personal train sat in silence. No hum of power, no movement, no orders. Kruger woke to find Becker pacing the embankment, uniform unbuttoned, his cap gone. The once proud SS officer now looked like any other tired man in retreat. He held a crumpled telegram in one hand, his thumb tracing the words as if disbelief might erase them. Weiss approached cautiously. More orders? Becker didn't look up. No, it's from a signal station near Linz. They say Berlin's surrounded. The Führer refuses to leave the city. He's staying in the bunker. The words hung there like smoke. No one asked what that meant. They all knew. The air had changed. It wasn't just spring moisture or gunpowder on the wind. It was the weight of something ending. You could feel it in the stillness of the men, in the way no one cleaned their boots or bothered to salute anymore. By mid-morning, Kruger decided to take the engine a few hundred meters forward, if only to keep the gears from freezing. As he stoked the embers and coaxed the locomotive to life, the sound startled a flock of crows from the trees. Their cries echoed through the valley. Harsh, chaotic, alive. Weiss climbed into the cab beside him. Feels wrong to move it, he muttered, like waking the dead. Kruger adjusted the throttle slowly. Better to keep it breathing, he said, even if it's dying. The train rolled forward at walking speed. The rails creaked beneath its weight, cutting through the morning fog like a memory refusing to fade. As they passed the curve near the woods, they saw what the night had hidden. A bomb crater directly ahead, blown clean through the line. Steel rails dangled into open air. Beyond the gap, the track vanished beneath a tangle of uprooted earth and shattered ties. Weiss swore softly, "That's it, we're finished." Kruger shut down the engine, his hands resting on the levers. "We've been finished for a long time." They climbed down, staring at the crater in silence. In that moment, the engineer realized that America, this 17-car monument to a fallen dream, had reached the end of its rails. Back at the command car, Becker stood with the remaining guards, discussing whether to destroy the train. "We can't let the Allies take it," one of them said. "They'll turn it into a trophy." But another guard shook his head. "What does it matter? The Führer's dead already. He just doesn't know it yet." The words drew a few nervous glances. No one challenged him. Not anymore. By late afternoon, they received one final radio signal, barely intelligible through the static. It came from somewhere near Munich. All units in Bavaria to surrender. Cease all movement. Preserve civilian life. Repeat. Cease all movement. The SS guards looked to Becker for instruction. For the first time since Kruger had known him, the officer had no words. He simply folded the message and slipped it into his pocket, then walked away into the woods. No one followed. The crew began dismantling what they could, removing insignias, burning papers, stripping the train of anything that could mark it as Hitler's. The polished silverware was buried beneath the soil. The portrait from the conference car was thrown into the fire, its edges curling black before the face vanished in smoke. As night fell, Kruger and Weiss sat beside the embers. The glow painted their faces in amber light. Somewhere beyond the hills, they could hear the faint rumble of tanks. Weiss broke the silence. "Do you think he ever saw it like this? The people running, the city's gone, Everything lost? Kruger stared into the fire. No, he said quietly. He only saw what he wanted, and now he can't see it all. Above them, the stars returned, small, cold, and painfully clear. The same stars that had once looked down on triumphal processions now watched over the ashes of a broken empire. Kruger thought of the thousands of miles he'd traveled with America, through Poland, France, Austria, the heart of a machine that had devoured itself. Now the machine sat still, its metal cooling, its legacy rusting before their eyes. At midnight, Weiss stood and listened. From the west came the faint sound of an American column, engines, boots, voices. Close enough now that you could almost imagine the glow of their flashlights through the trees. He turned to Kruger. "This is it, isn't it?" The engineer nodded slowly. "It was over long before they arrived. We're just the ones left to hear the echo." The next morning, when the Americans reached the ravine, they found America exactly as it had been left. The cars empty, the coal cold, the insignias scraped away. One soldier, leaning on his rifle, peered through a window at the abandoned command car, at the cracked leather chairs, the silent teleprinter, the stillness of what had once been power. "Whose train was this?" he asked. His sergeant looked around, reading the faint shadow of an eagle emblem burned into the wall. "The Führer's," he said quietly. "Guess he missed his last ride." And for the men who had served aboard it, the drivers, the guards, the cooks, the ones who'd seen the ruin roll past their windows, the sound of that train would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Not the thunder of victory, but the hollow silence of its final stop.